Many of the friction points, disengagement has happened, but not at two very critical areas. One is the Dipsang Plains, the other Dimchok. And through the course of this program, we will try and explain to you why those 2 points are important. But more importantly, today, the 19th round of talks between the core commanders of India and China happened at the line of actual control. So far, there's been no resolution. Clearly, this went on from 9:30 in the morning till about 5:30, so about 8 hours of talks, and we're expecting a statement from the Ministry of External Affairs and from the Northern Command of the Indian Army, along with a statement from the Chinese Foreign Ministry sometime tomorrow to understand if any breakthrough has happened in this current round, the 19th round of talks between the Indian and Chinese core commanders. But one thing we have to understand is that there are two big summits that are coming up. First, you have the BRICS summit next week, and then you have the G20 that's coming up in the month of September, in the first week of September. Is there now a sense of urgency or impetus, if you will, from both sides, from China and India, to try and find some kind of a solution to this situation, which frankly has been existing now for the better part of the last 3 years since the Galwan clashes of the summer of 2020? So is there no going back to the pre-2020 position? And more importantly, is there an impetus now to try and find some kind of a solution? But first, the story so far. All right, so let's explain to you the two remaining friction points. Remember, it started off in the summer of 2020. It started off with 7 friction points. Disengagement has been achieved in 5 of those, but there are 2 which are still outstanding. What are those 2 areas? Why are they critical? And why have both sides, despite multiple rounds of talks, not been able to find a solution? The 2 points are Dipsang, which is in the north, and Dimchok, which is in the east. And why are these 2 important? Dipsang, of course, is the northern plains. It's a tabletop plateau. It's at 16,000 feet. It's about 900 square kilometers of territory, which is currently the big standoff point. The reason why Dipsang is important is because it's plains. That makes it much easier for transport of military infrastructure, for moving troops as well as equipment very quickly. Dipsang becomes absolutely critical. Also, Dipsang, in its north and its west, it has the Siachen Glacier. On its east, it has Aksai Chin. So it basically sits or abuts that area between the Siachen Glacier on the one side and you have the Aksai Chin on the other. So if any party in a future conflict were to capture Dipsang, they would have A, the advantage of terrain because it's plains, and B, they can directly cut the link between Aksai Chin and the Siachen Glacier. That will be a very, very strategically important point. Dimchok, of course, is further east. It is further east as well as further south. That is where the second point where there is engagement between the Indian and Chinese troops. Again, in Dimchok, it sort of abuts the highway between Tibet and Xinjiang. Both of these areas, it clearly cuts or gives an advantage to any party that controls these 2 points to control or get direct visibility to the highway that connects Tibet to Xinjiang. And that's why this face-off has been going on for the better part of the last 3 years now. Even though they have sort of resolved some of the others, at least disengaged from some of the others, these 2 points are the ones that are still sticking points as far as the India-China situation is concerned. But what we have seen over the last 3 years is an eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation. India has really amped up both troops and, more importantly, physical infrastructure. More than 60,000 troops have been deployed at the line of actual control. 90 tanks. These are armored vehicles as well as heavy-duty machines that have been deployed there. There are 300 plus BMPs that have been moved to that area. Also, some of the Rafales, which were brought from France, have been moved closer to the line of actual control. The Sukhoi 30 MKIs, again, 5th generation fighter jets, they've been moved there as well, and so have the MiG-29s. And we're also getting reports that a new base is likely going to get constructed in Neoma, which is further south from these friction points. C-130Js, the Hercules, the big transporters, those have also been moved there, and so have the C-17s, the Globemasters. They've also been moved to the line of actual control. Artillery guns, yes, there is massive deployment of guns. Radar systems, which are meant to pick up both drone activity as well as fighter jets, those have been moved. But physical infrastructure-wise as well, India has amped up in terms of the number of roads, the kilometers of roads built there in a massive way in the last 4 or 5 years. So that is having a bearing as well. But we're just getting a piece of breaking news, and I want to go to that right now. The 19th round of the Corps Commander talks has concluded. Remember, these talks were happening in Chushul on the Chinese side. These concluded at about 5:30 this evening. It started at 9:30 in the morning, so it went on for a good 8 hours. The issues, of course, are related to disengagement at these 2 points, Depsang and Demchok. And so far, we have not got an official statement either from the Indian side or from the Chinese side. So we don't know the outcome of the 19th round of talks, whether or not there has been any kind of a clincher, any kind of a breakthrough. Let me go across to my colleague Akash, who's joining us on the phone line. Akash, what further details do we have? Do we have any information, even by way of sources, as to how the conversation, how the dialogue went today, and when can we expect some kind of a statement, both from the Indian side and from the Chinese side?
Right. So, Zaka, first of all, yes, it was the 19th round that got concluded at 5:30 p.m. today. And as you rightly mentioned, it got started at 9:30 and the talks went on for 8 hours. The important part is that MEA is actively taking part in these meetings from last 2-3 times, and this time, in fact, officials from Ministry of External Affairs and also from ITBP were a very part of this meeting. Now we are learning that the Ministry of External Affairs will be, issuing some sort of statement. We can expect this sort of statement by late evening or by morning tomorrow. We don't know the outcome, but Zaka, Depsang and Demchok areas are the 2 areas that were the point of discussion. And, as far as experts are concerned, so they say that out of total 7 friction points, we have buffer zone strategy working for many areas. We know that how disengagement happened last year at Patrol Point 15. But these 2 areas are the areas that are in focus. And in fact, for India, these are the 2 additional friction points where we want some sort of solution. Disengagement and de-escalation is what India is in favor of. On the other hand, China is stressing on bilateral relations. China is stressing on diplomatic relations and is trying to set the condition as new normal. But you see, Zaka, in not just Indian Army, but Indian Air Force has now deployed its additional troops. Yes, we don't want any sort of escalation. This is what has been maintained by Indian government. But as far as our readiness is concerned, so we have deployed all our additional assets, our resources, our surveillance systems, radars, and of course the fighter aircraft that you were talking about, our Rafales, our Sukhoi 30 MKI, the upgraded version, and of course MiG-29. So as of now, everyone is waiting for that statement, because that statement will be somewhere, clearing as to what was the outcome of this particular meeting, because we have seen that how last time, in fact, in the 18th round of commander level talks, everyone was expecting some sort of solution for Depsang and Demchok area. Yeah. But even in that meeting and after SPO, meeting, in fact, we saw that how both the countries had different stand. And in fact, it was categorically mentioned by Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh that we cannot expect normal relations without addressing the border issues.
All right, Akash, we'll leave it at that. We'll come back to you if and when we get that official statement from the Indian side on what exactly transpired during that dialogue today, the 19th round of Corps Commanders meeting. Let me now open this up to our panelists from China, or taking China's point of view. We have two guests. Andrew K.P. Liang is a China policy expert joining us from Hong Kong. Aina Tanjin is a political affairs commentator joining us from Beijing. And to take the India view, or the India point of view, Sushant Sareen is senior fellow with the Observer Research Foundation, and Colonel S. Dini is a former commanding officer of the infantry battalion at Pangong. And Pangong, mind you, was one of the friction points where they've disengaged. But let me go across first to Sushant Sareen and explain to our viewers two things. One, there have been 19 rounds of talks. These talks have been happening for the better part of the last 3 years. There are still two friction points. Why are they not able to resolve that? And B, do you think the time has come for this to be escalated to a higher level of engagement, because army commanders may not be in a position to resolve this issue?
Zaka, this hasn't been resolved because the Chinese don't want to resolve it. They created the problem in the first place, and clearly they think that they can drag this for as long as they can, and maybe try and extract something from India and then throw some crumbs our way. Thankfully, so far it seems that the government of India is not falling for it. And as your report yourself, or your reporter just said, that the Chinese are looking for normalization, but at the current, and maybe with some concessions. But India wants a much more expansive kind of an agreement, and disengagement, de-escalation, and whatever else follows from that. So one is that. The second is, you can escalate it to the level of the principals, but the principals have already given certain directions to the junior officers, right? And it hasn't sorted out. And it isn't sorting out because the principals in China don't want it to be sorted out. You see Xi Jinping, the emperor of China, making all kinds of bizarre, belligerent statements that be ready for war, we will fight war, and I don't know whatever else nonsense he keeps spouting from his mouth. So when you have dictators in countries like China, then you will have situations like this on the borders. Having said that, I think what is important to understand is that from the news reports which came today morning and yesterday, it's very clear that India is not backing down. It is also very clear that the government of India is giving a very clear indication of the level of preparedness and how far we are ready to take it if push comes to shove. We don't want it to come to that, but if it comes to that, we are prepared. Okay. So I think on the whole, it is a political decision which will ultimately be taken by Beijing and perhaps by New Delhi together. Until then, I don't think there's any solution.
Going to be any resolution. So, Colonel Dini, you've commanded these heights when you were in service. Tell us and tell our viewers why these 2 points, Depsang and Demchok, are remaining as the two last sort of unresolved issues ever since this crisis came to light in the summer of 2020.
Zaka, first and foremost, I think what you covered in your introduction during this program, the strategic importance of these two places itself makes these places very sensitive. As you rightly mentioned, that both these places are plain areas where the mechanized operations can be carried out in this high altitude area. So we know that wherever mechanized operations are carried out, those are the areas where you have a distinct, the battle or the entire campaign is decided on those operations. So therefore, there is a criticality for these areas from both sides. Like you rightly mentioned in the Dapsang Plains, where the DBO road is there, it's closer to the Aksai Chin area. So those criticalities there. Similarly in Demchok, it has again mechanized operation terrain, wherein there is an approach towards Leh and such like things. So first and foremost is this purely because of the strategic and the tactical significance of this area. That is why this has not been resolved. Secondly, very importantly, Zaka, these two areas have been a legacy issue for many years. So it's not the first time that we are going through the same issues discussing Demchong and Depsang. However, the other 5 areas which has been resolved was basically a problem which was generated post May 2020. So that is why I feel that maybe in this time when there is a friction and when there is a discussion happening, I think India is taking a very hard stand that let's resolve these two issues also. so that there is peace and tranquility in the real sense which can be maintained along the LAC. I find that probably we are taking a hard stand that unless you resolve this, there will be no normalization.
Yeah, I just want to bring that to the attention of our viewers that in Depsang as well as in Demchok, there were previous flare-ups that had happened. I think in Depsang in 2013, and this was just before, I remember this, I was covering this from China. This was just before Li Keqiang's first visit to India after he became premier. And they managed to resolve that. Shiv Shankar Menon, I think, was the NSA at that time. They managed to resolve that just in time before that visit happened. Similarly, again in 2015, after Mr. Modi became the Prime Minister, and I think it was again just before he was going for his first visit to China as Prime Minister, again Depsang flared up. So these two areas we have seen sort of flare-ups in the past. But I want to take a slightly more holistic picture, and I want to ask Aina Tanjan and then after that Andrew Liang. Aina Tanjan, the view here in India seems very simple, that India is building infrastructure. You heard Colonel Dinny a moment ago talking about this very, very critical DSDBO road, which connects Dipsang all the way up to the Karakoram Pass on the north, and of course it strategically sits between Aksai Chin and the Siachen Glacier, so it's a strategic point. The view here in India is China willy-nilly, by flaring up 7 points in the summer of 2020, and 5 of those we've seen disengagement. We've not seen de-escalation, but we've seen disengagement. What it wants to do is to force the issue in both Depsang and Demchok, thereby forcing India to accept or concede in these two areas. Unfortunately for China, for the last 3 years, India has refused to try and accept any kind of solution that's been imposed on India, any kind of middle ground that's being imposed by China, because India realizes precisely why these two areas are strategically important.
Yes, I'm sure there's a question in there somewhere, but let me attempt to answer it. The fact is, you stated correctly, this is a strategic point. So in the past, it's been an issue. It's an issue now, and potentially in the future, even if there's some sort of withdrawal agreement, it could be another major issue. So, what do we learn from this? The only way out of this is a diplomatic solution, where the main players sit down and say, look, this is how we can settle this and have an actual line, a demarcation line, a border between the countries. That would be by far the best thing. So if you want to leave things to generals, of course, anything of strategic value, they're going to say, no, we can't give that up, because if we give it up, we give it to them. If they have it, they have the strategic advantage. So it's a zero-sum game for generals, but it is a larger game for those who are in charge of countries and trying to figure out where they're going. So there's no question in Beijing's mind that suddenly, that India is going to roll over and play dead on these issues. I don't know where anyone would get that idea. These are contentious issues, as I said, strategic. The issue is, when will there be a diplomatic solution that ends all this nonsense?
No, but even if I agree with you on the principle that I don't think this can be resolved at the level of army commanders. I agree with that in principle. But I don't see any diplomat, an Indian diplomat at that, or an Indian political leader in a position to say, okay, let's accept some kind of a buffer zone, if you will, in Depsang and Demchok. I don't see how that would be acceptable. I don't see how anyone, diplomat or politician in India, would buy that.
I agree with you. I mean, no one wants to look weak at this point. But what I'm saying is, diplomatically, the larger solution is to agree not on a buffer zone, but to agree to an actual border, and whatever that entails. That would be the mark of somebody who is a great person. Two leaders coming together and settling something that could potentially plunge both of them into, a war. You want to avoid that. Neither China nor India are interested in wars. They're interested in the welfare of their people. So that should be the number one issue. But I agree with you. We're not in disagreement.
Before I go to Andrew Liang, Sushant, if you want to respond to this is a familiar sort of Chinese argument that, let's take the 30,000 feet view and say, okay, This is a historical issue. It's a legacy issue. I mean, both countries went to war in '62 because of this unfinished business. It is still unfinished. It needs to be demarcated. So let's take the big view on this. Can that be acceptable to forget about this dispensation, any dispensation in India?
Zaka, India was all for taking the big view. For almost 30 years, we took the big view. And in fact, when Mr. Modi's government came in, one of the first initiatives they were taking with the Chinese was that let's go ahead and let us do precisely what was being suggested right now on your program. Let us start demarcating at least the line of actual control so that the kind of accidents and differing interpretations which we have, at least that is taken care of. The Chinese first initially agreed. In fact, there was even a proposal to start exchanging maps of each other's, and then they suddenly pulled back. Which is why I tell you that the Chinese don't want to settle it now. They don't want even a diplomatic solution. They want to take you up the garden path, distract you, deflect you on a variety of other of these kind of dilatory tactics, occupy you on something, with some minor intrusion somewhere, then back down from there and say that, okay, fine, we've done this, now you give us such and such and such. I think we've seen through the game, so which is why, despite the fact that there has been some amount of disengagement, the de-escalation has not taken place. If you have almost 70,000 troops with missiles and artillery and airfields and everything else coming up, the situation remains pretty tense. So for the Chinese to pretend that, India is being bloody-minded about it, that's not true. The Indian government had made this proposal. The Chinese backed down.
Okay. Let me go to Andrew K.P. Liang. Andrew Liang, again, I don't understand why you look at all the territorial disputes that China is engaged with in right now, with the Philippines, with Vietnam, with Japan, of course, a whole bunch of countries in Southeast Asia. There was the problem with Bhutan a few years ago. That still has not been resolved fully. And then you have the India problem for the better part of the last 3 years. It's come to the fore after the deadly clashes in Galwan, and it's still unresolved. The common factor just seems to be China. It seems to be that China, as it rises, wants to throw its weight around, is paranoid about the United States and some of its friendlier countries in Asia sort of ganging up to stop China's rise. And somehow you're picking fights with every country with whom you have a territorial dispute. I see that as China's problem more than the problem of any of these other countries. It's not like Philippines and India have a problem. It's not like Vietnam and India have a problem. It's not like Japan and India have a problem. The one common factor to all these disputes happens to be China.
Well, I think that, as you pointed out earlier, these disputes are legacy disputes, have been hanging around for a long, long time. And that's why it's the 19th round of discussions and at the military commander level. But of course, as again pointed out in your program earlier, the military commanders are not authorized on either side to concede even an inch of each side's claimed territory. So I think that there is no doubt that both leaders in India and China do not want a war. But because of the tensions, military assets are building up on both sides of the line of actual control. And of course, what both sides don't want is unintended consequences. So that's what these field commanders rounds and rounds of discussions are for, is to take stock of what is on the ground and to build up some sort of do's and don'ts. And to agree on or to disagree, and to build up some sort of understanding on either side. But unfortunately, because of these disputes are getting tenser as years go by, so I think that the danger is quite real as the military assets are building up, as I said, both on land and also in the air. So I think that it's incumbent on the field commanders to again read the grounds, read the facts on the ground, both sides, and to come to some sort of understanding of each other's position.
No,
so as not
you know,
to
the problem with reading the facts on the ground,
some of
and
these
the problem with that
undesirable
argument
and
is
dangerous
the facts on the
unintended
ground were altered by one party, by force. That is the problem.
India.
One party, by force, tried to alter the facts on the ground, and now you're presenting a new set of facts on the ground saying, accept this as the new normal. How can that be acceptable? Let's say the opposite happened. India forcibly, by force, changed the facts on the ground, changed the status quo on the ground, and then said to China, okay, accept this now. Would China accept it? No.
I think that that's why that the so-called line of actual control have never been clear on either side, and hence all this conflicts of opinions, and it is to manage these conflicts because the line of actual control has never been clear. That both sides need to come sort of understanding of the do's and don'ts. As I said, military commanders are not.
Again, the problem with that argument, I'll go to Colonel Dini after this. Every time you hear from a Chinese guest, oh, this is historic and this is legacy issue and this is because the border has not been demarcated. While that may be true, what China has done in the last 3 years since the Galwan clashes and these friction points is basically bring a gun to a negotiation and say, oh, we don't know where the line is. This is all happening because we don't know where the line is. And now we're going to draw the line here. So you accept that the line is here. I mean, that's not going to work. But Colonel Dini, the one thing, and I think this is a view within the army as well, is that when India took that action, the counter-action at the Kailash ranges, this was, I think, in August of 2020, it had an advantage which forced the Chinese to retreat from some of the friction points. Should India back then have pressed that advantage further in a way that China would be forced to climb down on both Depsang and Demchok, or as you say, that was a completely different story that predates 2020. The other friction points were perhaps just used as some kind of a bargaining chip because ultimately what they want is concessions at Depsang and Demchok.
Zaka, I don't think that could be the reason because, as I mentioned, this was been there for a very long time, and I don't think they would have planned in such a manner to take such a huge risk. And the fact that India did the operations there on the South Bank,
on the South Bank, to respond.
And the reason why they vacated was that particular operation by the Indian troops were with a specific objective of making or forcing the Chinese to vacate from the North Bank and from the South Bank, which they could. So I think after that, there was no point in holding on to those heights, and because once you do an operation, it is with an objective, and once that objective is achieved, you naturally finish that operation. Otherwise, there is no point in just hanging around there.
Yeah.
Second point is that this kind of options are always available even today. As we speak, that options are already there, always there, and it is not necessarily on the Kailash range, or it could be anywhere along the line of actual control. So that even the Chinese are aware of. But what I feel,
so why is that then not being exercised? Why are those options not being exercised?
It's a kind of how much of cost do you want to pay for doing those operations now? Like for example, everybody mentions that the military commanders are speaking. I think it's a good sign that they are speaking. 19 rounds of talks have happened, and one thing which we should remember, Zaka, is that after the whatever conflict happened in 2020 and later on, there has been no physical contact between the troops. So there has been a uneasy calm, but there is still peace which is there, which is holding on. So that buffer zone and the kind of disengagement which has happened in those 5 friction points, those areas there has been no violence which has taken place. And the Depsang and Demchok, I think it will take some more time because as we all know, it is not a thing suddenly which has happened now. It has been there, so it will take a lot more time. Okay. And I feel one of the reasons it's not getting resolved is because of India's hard standard. You have to sit on the table and you have to resolve this. Only then we can go for the next step, which is the de-escalation part.
Okay, so Sushant Sareen, and then I'll give closing comments to Ainar. Just in terms of one of the points that Colonel Dini made, and I think it's a valid point, that India is pressing hard on both Depsang as well as on them chalk because of the strategic value that these two places hold. But just paint the big picture for us here, Sushant. You have the BRICS summit next week. Again, both leaders would be in the same room. Whether they'll have a separate bilateral, we don't know. And then you have the G20, where Xi Jinping is expected to come here along with the 20 other heads of government. The Prime Minister will be hosting all of them. Again, we don't know on the sidelines of G20 whether there will be a separate meeting between Mr. Modi and Mr. Xi Jinping. But, you know, where is this story moving? Because you cannot, I mean, it's been 3 years. Yes, previous flare-ups have taken their own sweet time to resolve. But what has essentially changed because of what happened in Galwan is that the agreements that were working on the ground for the last 30 years, they have been torn apart. And now, I mean, even the External Affairs Minister said, we need a new modus vivendi when it comes to India-China.
No, I think that's quite clearly the case. I think those old agreements, I don't see how Indians will fall back upon those agreements, given the kind of treacherous conduct of the Chinese troops. Number one. Number two, you know, the escalation, and I think we have to keep hammering home this point. Whatever is happening in Ladakh right now is the result of Chinese aggression in that area in 2020. Everything else has followed from them. So the Chinese have to start backing down. Number three, I'm afraid now I have a different opinion from what Colonel Dinny expressed on withdrawal from the Kailash ranges. Even if we had struck an agreement, maybe it would have been better if we had made it as part of a larger package that yes, this agreement has been struck, it will be implemented when we strike agreements all along the friction points rather than doing it in a peaceful way. Maybe in their own wisdom they decided that a piecemeal way is a better approach. But in retrospect, I think we should have made it a kind of an omnibus deal. And finally, diplomatically, Zaka, forget about BRICS, but I think when the G20 summit takes place, I don't see any compulsion on the part of Mr. Modi to enter into a Faustian bargain with the Chinese. I think the person who loses face if there is no meeting or no bilateral between the two principals is Xi Jinping. Because he's the guy who prances about like he's some kind of God's gift to mankind and some kind of goddamn middle kingdom complex that these Chinese have. We don't buy that. So if he wants to play, you know, a decent neighbor, a good neighbor, yes, he's welcome. And we'll certainly welcome him. We'll certainly want to have a good conversation with these guys. But if he's going to play the big bully in the room, he can go take a hike for all we care. And then he's the guy who loses face. We don't.
Okay, Einar, just in terms of the final word, again, you know, the Chinese keep saying this again and again, oh, India is drawing closer to the US orbit and, you know, India is becoming a sort of ally of the United States and so on. But, you know, the only way you can temper that movement in that direction is if China starts behaving normally and not forcibly change the status quo on the ground. You know, the more China is aggressive on that front, the more India will be pushed further and further to the US ambit.
I try to be patient. If India wants to be a doorstop to the Asian century, that's well within the rights. You're a sovereign nation. But the idea that the line of actual control is a line is nonsense, as you well know. It's a disputed area. Both sides claim that this part and that part is theirs. They have buffer zones. It's been going on for quite some time. In terms of what happened at Ladakh, it was your colonel who had decided to go over and kick over some tents that the Chinese had. Why he was there, no one knows. It was never revealed.
No, Einar, come on. No. I don't think that's how facts. I don't think those are the facts on the ground. No, I don't think those are the facts on the ground. And two, I'm sorry, you are referring to someone who made the supreme sacrifice for this country. I don't think you can. I don't think you can refer to. I don't think you can refer to him or his men who lost their lives. Defending India and defending India's sovereignty. I'm sorry, I don't. No, I'm sorry, I don't accept that language.
You can always try to paint your side
I don't accept that language. I'm sorry. I don't accept that language. It was not. I don't think Colonel Santosh Babu paid with his life just because he destroyed a few tents. I'm sorry. He was defending
If
sovereignty
the
of India,
Chinese,
and that is what
had
we call
gone
a
and
supreme
kicked over some
sacrifice, and
Indian
you would understand that.
Well,
I mean,
if
you would understand that, Einar,
what would have happened?
as
if it had been the other way around,
no,
what would have happened?
as an American,
you
you would understand that. That a soldier
No, I don't
defending the
understand it. I think
sovereignty
it's
of
ridiculous.
his country,
I think
his motherland,
I think-
is something
I
that
think a
shouldn't be
colonel
beyond
shouldn't
your
be involved
understanding.
in that.
No, I'm sorry.
My understanding
I
is-
refuse to accept that the way you
What,
you
that kicking-
the
that
way
going
you
over
phrased
and
it, the
kicking
way
over
you
some
phrased
tents
it,
was not going
that an
to
Indian soldier
result
crossed
in
over and destroyed a few
fisticuffs with
tents.
other
No, I'm
soldiers?
sorry. I don't think that's what happened.
Really?
No, I don't think
think
that's
so?
what happened.
Well, that was the report by your own agency.
A soldier and his team were defending the sovereignty of the country that they're meant to
Taking over
defend,
some tents?
and they paid for
Taking
it
over
with
some
their
tents that's
lives.
defending it?
They paid for
He
it
didn't go
with
up
their
there
lives.
He didn't go up there with guns.
No, I'm sorry.
He went over and
I'm
kicked
sorry.
over some
I
tents.
refuse. I refuse your characterization of
refuse,
that
but the facts still remain,
of
right?
those events. Like I said, I'm disagreeing with
those
you.
are the reports-
I'm putting that
those are
on
the
the
reports of
record.
your own
I don't
side.
need no reports. We have
don't need
spoken to the
reports.
families.
Okay, I
we've spoken to
understand.
the commanding
No, the
officer
facts
there.
do.
I mean, this is a matter of record. I mean, to say that this is what news reports are saying, I'm sorry. I mean, for people who've made the supreme sacrifice, I think you're referring to them in very, very, not correct ways. I'm sorry, I'm not using stronger language, but I'm sorry.
Absolutely. He has no idea what happens
Yep.
there.
Exactly.
Sir, you should go back to writing Bollywood scripts.
No,
All you have is this
I'm curtailing the chat. I'm curtailing the chat here, but like I said, I mean, I don't think in any civilized discourse you should be referring to any
Civilized
soldier
discourse,
who has
calling
given up
somebody's
his
leader
life
a
defending the
dictator
idea of
and all
sovereignty
those
of
things.
his or
Is that
her
civilized?
country in
somebody
such
said that about
derogatory
Modi,
terms.
you'd
I'm
be
sorry.
screaming.
I'm going to leave it at that. I'm
not
not going
civilized
to
at all.
engage any further. But sorry, Einar, we had to sort of end on that rather sour note because of the way you characterized what happened with Colonel Santosh Babu and his men. But anyway, let's now move on to the other story that we're tracking, and this is again a domestic political story. Education. It has now often become a battleground between the left and the right, between opposition-ruled states and BJP-ruled states in a big move against the central government's decision to remove several chapters from NCERT textbooks. The Kerala government has decided to bring back some of these omitted chapters. It has brought back the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi, which was done by Nathuram Godse, and his connections with right-wing organizations are well known. That's been brought back into history textbooks in Kerala. So has the question of the 2002 Gujarat riots when Mr. Modi was Chief Minister of Gujarat. That too is part of the portions that have been brought back by the Kerala State Board into state board textbooks against what the NCERT had recommended about the dropping of these provisions. Now, the revised school curriculum will be made available for Kerala students after Onam, which is later this month. So from September, the term that begins from September, they will have access to these new textbooks. The left claims that it is only simply reinstating history for the youth of Kerala, which has been backed by the Congress as well. Of course, the BJP in Kerala has vehemently opposed the re-inclusion of all these omitted parts in history textbooks. The BJP has called this a diversionary tactic from the corruption allegations that the Chief Minister and his family were facing in recent days.
ഒഴിവാക്കപ്പെട്ട വളരെ പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട പാഠഭാഗങ്ങളുണ്ട്. ചരിത്രം, എക്കണോമിക്സ്, സയൻസ് തുടങ്ങിയവയുള്ള അതിൻ്റെ ഡീറ്റെയിൽസ് എത്തിക്കാൻ പോകുന്നില്ല. അത് ഒഴിവാക്കപ്പെട്ട പാഠഭാഗങ്ങളുണ്ട്. രാഷ്ട്രപിതാ മഹാത്മാഗാന്ധിയുടെ വാദത്തെ സംബന്ധിച്ചിടത്തോളം കാര്യമുണ്ട്. പണ്ഡിറ്റ് ജവഹർലാൽ നെഹ്റുവിൻ്റെ ഭരണകാലത്തെ കാര്യങ്ങൾ സംബന്ധിച്ചിടത്തോളമുണ്ട്. ഗുജറാത്ത് കലാപം, അങ്ങനെയൊക്കെയുള്ള കുറേ വിഷയങ്ങൾ ഒഴിവാക്കപ്പെട്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്.
NCERT took the position that as far as they were concerned, it was about making life easier for the children because many had extra work to catch up on after the COVID pandemic. The problem is, unfortunately, that the deletions seem to follow an unfortunate pattern where certain subjects were favored for deletion and other matters were retained or even expanded.
जिनका परिवार न सिर्फ वंशवाद कर रहा है बल्कि प्रशासन में सक्रिय हस्तक्षेप करते हुए भ्रष्टाचार में लिप्त होने के आरोप से बच नहीं रहा। संभवतः उससे ध्यान बटाने के लिए एक विवादास्पद मुद्दे को ला रहे हैं।
All right, I want to go across to our guests who are joining us. Anil K. Antony is National Secretary of the BJP. Vivek Srivastav of the CPIM will also be joining us. Anil Antony, let me start with you. The claim by the left and by the Congress also in Kerala is these were omitted portions. These are part of history textbooks and have been taught to our children for generations together. And it's the BJP and the NCRT under this dispensation which deliberately dropped those portions, whether it was the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi, whether it was the 2002 Gujarat riots. Thereby, you are the ones who are playing with history and history textbooks and with the knowledge being imparted to our children. The left government in Kerala is simply bringing back history as it was taught.
Thank you, Mr. Jacob, for having me in the show. So each passing day, it is becoming more and more clear that there is not much difference between the left front and the Congress in Kerala as far as any national issue is concerned. Ever since independence, this is something which we need to note, and that is ever since independence, there had been this large set of left-leaning as well as Marxist historians and academics who over a period of time started dominating and monopolizing every single academic institution and university across the country, and they started teaching lessons which were very aligned to which were very biased and aligned to certain ideological leanings. And even before that, you had the 200 years of colonization, where again the British were also doing the same thing. And the one thing that was common between both of them was that both these, the British and these leftist Marxist historians, they started putting India's cultural civilizational culture, heritage and values under the carpet so that they can divide our communities, our people based on religion, and they could divide and rule. They can, let's say, take forward their rule. So this was happening for a long time. Now in 2014, when Narendra Modi ji became the Prime Minister, along with the unprecedented growth that this country started having, something else that started happening is that we started reclaiming our old cultural past. We started reclaiming our civilizational culture, heritage, values. And that started showing in many areas, including education, including changes in NCRT, where at one side you have the national education policy, which is actually one of the most advanced curriculum anywhere in the world, where we are teaching our students everything from artificial intelligence to machine learning to everything that is making our students fit for the fourth industrial revolution and taking this country forward, aligned to our Prime Minister's vision of transforming this country into a developed country in 2047. Let me just come. It's just two more sentences. So at one side you have this, and then we are taking all our cultural and civilizational heritage. Also, we are amalgamating modernity as well as our heritage, and we are taking forward. And then these usual suspects, again the leftists mainly in Kerala, for them this is not at all agreeable, because this is actually tearing apart a narration which they have been trying to build for the last 75 years. And this is where all this intolerance is coming from. And it is not at all surprising that, let's say, the communists in Kerala are doing what they are doing, especially...
So, let me go across to Vivek Srivastav of the CPIM, who's also joining us. Vivek Srivastav, the point is that if individual states, and in this case opposition ruled states like Kerala, are going to teach a different history to the students there, then you'll have this very odd situation where students coming from certain states will have one set of historical facts being taught to them, and another set of students will have something else being taught to them. So a student from Delhi and a student from Kerala, or a student from Mumbai and a student from Bangalore will be learning two histories. I mean, we cannot have that, which is why you had an NEP, you had a national education policy. So Vivek Srivastav, what you're essentially doing is you're teaching or you're at least paving the way to teach two histories.
You see, yes, you are right, and I do agree with you that this is something that is, I mean, a very different kind of a model that we are having. But have you ever thought of it that for the last 75 years, why did controversy like this never ever happened? You had VP Singh, a non-Congress government, you had Congress governments, you had Deve Gowda, you had Atal Bihari Vajpayee coming in the middle, you know, we had a left-supported UPA government at the center. However, I mean, such a wide debate, such a lot of discrepancy, such a lot of controversy, it never happened. It never happened because there was a common consensus of what this country is, what is the idea of India, what is the history and what should be taught. Minor discrepancies here and there is a different issue. Now this government is trying to be something different. The reason is they are trying to rewrite history. They are trying to create something which was not there. The RSS never fought for the freedom of this country. 1925 they were formed. Now they are trying to cook up their own heroes who don't exist. You have to understand that Akbar was as much an Indian as anyone else. So was Shah Jahan, so was Jahangir. They had Hindu wives, they had Hindu mothers. There was an amalgamation of cultures which they are not willing to accept. So Akbar has to be shown in a bad light. Bahadur Shah Zafar did fight for the independence of this country against the British. He was a unifying point. It has to be recognized. Taj Mahal is a structure which was a wonder in the world. You have to recognize it. So what is Sanskriti, what is culture has to be seen in the right realistic perspective.
No.
We studied in our
once again, Mr. Srivastava, the contention
Yeah.
that the right has, and I don't know how much you heard of what Anil Antony was saying before you joined us. The contention that the right has had is that history over the last 70-75 years since our independence has been taught from a certain prism or a certain point of view which is left-oriented, Marxist historians and so on. But history is not always seen from and cannot be seen from an ideological prism or an ideological point of view. History is history. You have to teach it as facts. And you can't have, like I said,
I agree with
history students in Kerala are learning about one thing and history students in Delhi learning the exact opposite. So what the right is saying is they are only correcting a historic tilt that was there for the last 70 years where history was always taught from a left-leaning / Marxist perspective.
No. I mean, this is not the right thing to say. There was a broader consensus. Maulana Azad was the first education minister of this country. He was not a leftist. He belonged to the Congress party. And as I told you, there were many other governments that came, including Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government. But there was never a debate like this that ever happened. I mean, the point is you are not willing to understand, I mean, by you I mean the RSS and the BJP and the Sangh Parivar, they are not willing to accept that other cultures, other religions today are very much a part of India. They have contributed historically, they came, they are still calling Akbar an invader, they are still calling Shah Jahan an invader, they are still calling Jahangir an invader. So, I mean, this is not the right history. Yes, we had a very rich Hindu history. We had a very rich Buddhist history. We had a very rich Jain history. We also have a very rich Muslim history which contributed. We also had a very good Christian history which contributed over here. We had you had the Portuguese fight. We had the Portuguese Revolution where we finally freed the country in 1960s. So I mean everything has to be amalgamated and that is how it was.
Okay.
Now if you are trying to say that no, there is only a Hindu perspective of history, only a Hindu history, only the Hindu Rajas were great, only the Hindus have contributed.
Anil Antony, respond to that. I mean, Mughal history is Mughal history. It's part of this country. I mean, so, when you view it from your prism, you're also coloring the history from a political / ideological point of view, which is exactly what you accuse the Marxist historians of doing. Anil Antony.
Thank you. So I was listening to Srivastavji, and this is exactly what I said when I initially made my points, and that is, let's say, when for a long time we saw history, it was always through particular lenses. There used to be a gentleman called Mr. James Mill, who was a Britishman who, when he wrote India's history, he had not even visited the country more than once or twice, and then he wrote a large book on Indian history, where he divided Indian society into Hindus and Muslims. That is how he understood things. And right now you look at things, if you look at how all these leftists and Marxists and these, let's say, people who are still clinging on to the old beliefs in history, talk about history, you are still following the same thought processes. And that is, in their views, let's say you keep stressing on Mughals. There is nothing, we are not saying that Mughals were not a part of Indian history in any manner, but we are a very complex society where during different points of time, you had empires like the Mauryas and Guptas and Chalukyas, and this is a country which is a civilizational country with almost thousands of years of our heritage and culture. This is a country where we have tremendous depth in many aspects, and sadly, at this moment, the alternative of what we are standing for is trying to make it into a binary where they want to only see our let's say they talk about pluralism, but finally when you talk about pluralism, it is, let's say, a binary of you have the Mughals and the non-Mughals, or you have the Muslims and the Hindus, and this is the only way they are able to see things. This is the only way they are able to perceive things. Right now, there is a lot of criticism coming from different corners when people are saying, okay, in 75 years, this hasn't happened. In 75 years, there was a consensus, there is a consensus, etc., etc. But at some point, our friends in the opposition needs to understand that things have reached an inflection point in 2014, where right now, in 2014, that is why I stressed in my first argument also, when in 2014, when Narendra Modi ji became the Prime Minister, along with the unprecedented growth that our country is having, we are also once again reclaiming a lot of our cultural heritage, our values, and our culture, which had been brushed under the carpet for 75 years and another 200 years before by the British and by these leftist Marxist historians who actually, yes.
So Vivek Srivastav, I think Anil Antony has a point in as much as, you say that there was a consensus. I don't know what this consensus was, but the fact is that consensus seemed to be between, the Congress's ideological point of view, the left ideological point of view. Even though Mr. Vajpayee ran 6 years of an NDA government, that was a coalition government. It was not, Mr. Modi's government is the first single party majority right of center government that India has seen. And therefore, they are not buying into this consensus. They are asking, why should there be this consensus when it comes to teaching history? Because if it's being taught from a left ideological point of view, then the right will also say that, you need to teach it from a right ideological point of view.
History is history and there is no right or left in it. It has to be factual. So the facts are that we did have Hindu kingdoms, we did have the Rajputana even at the time of the Mughals. It is taught to us. We are taught about Raja Man Singh, we are taught about Maharana Pratap, we are talked about Akbar, we are taught about Chanakya, we have been taught about Chandragupta Maurya, we have been taught about Ashoka. I mean, it has been a very holistic history. It is not as if other cultures, other religions, other kings have not been taught. It has all been in a balance. But you have to realize that even in a certain period, certain kings are more important, they are more powerful. It has to be said so. I cannot, polish it off. Secondly, what kind of a history are they trying to write? Nothing about Gandhi's assassination, nothing about Nathuram Godse, nothing about the Gujarat riots in 2002. Why should the history be selective?
No, but
why is this,
Mr. Srivastav,
is this being
2002 Gujarat riots.
Sardar Patel was responsible for banning the RSS at the time.
But that's not the only riot that happened in this country. There was Bhagalpur before that. There was 1984 anti-Sikh riots before that.
Yes, why not?
RR history textbooks outlining every riot that happened in this country. No. Right?
No,
again, you are selectively picking and choosing what suits a particular narrative.
No, I am not selective. If the aim of the right wing is to somehow wash off the hands of Gandhi's assassination, wash off the fact that Sardar Patel banned the RSS, wash off so many facts about Savarkar and try to represent it in a different way, try to show down everything that is Mughal and Muslim and Islamic, including the architecture and the rule and the land reform movement.
All right.
That is the problem.
We've got to leave it at that. We'll see how this story plays out. Like I said, Kerala has now, through its state education board, reverted back some of the portions that were removed from the NCERT textbooks. For the state board textbooks, they have now gone back to some of those deleted portions. But I suspect this is more politics and less history, and I suspect that now that Kerala has done this, you will see other state boards, other state governments, opposition-run state governments doing the same in history textbooks and history lessons being taught in those respective states. And that, unfortunately, is just political and it has nothing to do with history. So that's a wrap. Thanks very much for tuning in. We'll catch you again tomorrow night, same time. In the meanwhile, from me, Zaka Jacob, the rest of the Brass Tacks team, and everybody here at CNN News 18, a very, very happy and prosperous Independence Day. We wish 1.3 billion Indians here and around the world a very, very happy Independence Day. We have come quite a distance in these last 75 plus years, but we have a fair distance to go as well. So thank you very much for tuning into our program. Once again, happy Independence Day. We'll catch you again on Wednesday. Good night.
Presented by
limitations so as to ensure its misapplication to dissent. Sedition was never meant to apply to political
dissent in our country.
There was enough protection in that particular provision to ensure that it does not so extend. The problem with the provision was not the provision but the application.
All right.
And the application is what created this kind of furor.
Yes.
But unfortunately, the manner in which the government is going about its business today shows that while nominally removing it from the section, the intent to misapply the particular provision is as live today as it was then.
I think you have said that in very clear terms. Rajiv Ji, the intent to misapply the provision is as clear, evident and alive as it was earlier. That's what Mr. Aman Lekhi is saying.
No, I completely disagree with my friend, Mr. Lekhi, who is senior in the bar with us. First of all, he is saying that the new system will be considered as a prejudicial system of existing system. What existing system has brought in this country? Pendency of more than 5 crore cases? What I am trying to say, he should clarify what is the issue, what law is brought in all these 3 new acts or bills right now, these bills, that is prejudicial to the criminal jurisprudence or the system, judicial system. What I am trying to say, all these issues which were being debated in this country, like section IPC 377, gone. It is about the Rajdrah, that is gone. Reason, if somebody conspire to overthrow the country or break the country, that will be there, treason will be there. But Rajdrah is gone. What about the criminal defamation that at least now you can do some community service? Many things has been brought and the things which was not helping. Like I'll tell you one thing. If any crime, one car is attached, that car is lying in a junking. Now all these things I was going through, that new Sanhita, in that it is there that all the goods which is attached, that can be sold during the trial. The trial has to be completed in a particular time period. So all these 3 things which are important, if you see, I talked about 377, I talked about the Rajdrah, I talked about the crime against women. You know, crime against women, rape to the kids is now declared more henious. Minimum 20 years life term for gang rape or death. Even many things are there which we can discuss. And the most important point is that in IPC there were 511 sections. Now it is 355 sections because many crimes were not. Just one second.
Yes.
I'm only coming on very important point. Like terrorism, it was not fully well defined. Now in this act you will find what is terrorism, what is treason, what is the difference between Rajdrah and Deshdrah. You cannot do Deshdrah. You can oppose government, not the country.
No, you're
what
right.
What is wrong
you're
with
right.
that?
You're right.
And only last point, which he said, it is the prejudicial to the existing system. Existing system has not delivered justice in this country, sir. The justice is available for the rich people, not for the common man. So there should be a timeline. There should be a fixed timeline so that the courts will have to work and deliver justice.
No, Rajiv Ji, I think I will pick on the last part of what you just said, that justice has been a luxury of the privileged in this country. You're right about that. And the colonial baggage cannot be shed till every person, irrespective of their caste or financial status, has equal access to justice and institutions of justice in our country. The argument that Mr. Lekhi was making is that the manner in which these reforms have been presented makes one seem like everything is going to be okay if these 3 bills are passed. The reality of the matter is, if there are no judicial reforms in this country, if the number of judges at the local level are not increased, if the police reforms are not implemented in this country, no real change will really come in. I want to bring in Ashpreet also on that point. Ashpreet, barring the politics of it, and you're a lawyer yourself, what are the substantial points on which you disagree with the 3 proposed bills that have been tabled in Parliament?
Thank you very much. Kindly allow me a minute and a half uninterrupted. As far as this entire exercise is concerned, the entire criminal law overhaul, the Bharatiya Janata Party is simply doing it in order to leave an imprint on our social...
Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. India and China held border talks again today, the 19th round in 3 years. Don't expect a breakthrough though. But this comes just before the G20 summit in Delhi, where Xi Jinping has been invited. Will the Chinese president come? And will he clear